What is going on, everybody? My favorite time of the week, Wednesday, which means only one thing: time to make some PGA DFS lineups and talk a little bit about this week's event. Here in this live stream, we're going to talk about everything you need to know, whether it's the weather, my player poll, of course. Your live questions, will be answering them the entire time here. So if there's anything that you're wondering about for this week in terms of modeling specific players, go ahead and fire that down in the chat. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. First off, with a review of the weather, because for the first two rounds, it is going to be especially pertinent. So you can see early on Thursday, there is a little bit of uncharacteristic weather. You see 10 to 12 miles an hour of sustained winds and somewhere in the teens range when it comes to the wind gusts, which usually in the morning, it's the opposite, right? It's usually a little bit calmer than what it is in the afternoon. You can see that's not the case here. In the afternoon, the winds die down into the single digits in terms of their sustained winds, and the wind gusts dive down to right around 10 to even 8 miles an hour towards the end of the day. So in general, I would expect the scoring average to, of course, favor those playing in the afternoon. But when we take a look at Friday, you can see that that same wave that's playing in the afternoon on Thursday is also going to be in by far the more favorable conditions on Friday. It's the normal conditions we would expect, where, of course, the wind is laying down a little bit in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we have 16 mile an hour of sustained winds and upwards of 20 mile an hour wind gusts towards the latter half of the day. So this is going to be one of the few times I do advocate for a little bit of a PM AM stack, because first off, you can see the advantage there on day one, but more notably, the advantage that's going to be there on day two. You have the more receptive greens in the morning, and of course, a lot less wind in play. So a lot of the top end guys, we're going to hop into the player poll here in a second. Actually, we'll go ahead and do it right now. We'll catch up on chat before we hop into it too. Is at the morning wave. You're going to see guys like Rory McIlroy, guys like Corey Connors, Answer, Fitzpatrick, Terrell Hatton are all playing in the morning wave. So it's going to be kind of unavoidable with taking some of these guys, but particularly when we get down to the 8K range, 7K range, I'm hopefully, or at least preferentially, going to hope that they're playing in the afternoon wave. Now, there is somewhat gettable conditions tomorrow morning, right? It's only 12 miles an hour of wind, but I'm more worried about that Friday afternoon. If it's going to be 20 to 25 mile an hour wind gusts, that's going to be really hard for these guys to play in. So we'll catch up on chat before we hop into it. We have Snipe down there saying, yo, what's going on, dude? Ali Burrow down there as well. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Lots of research that had to be done this week with the new golf course. What is going on, Neil? Hopefully you're doing well as well. And Anthony says the weather station a bit further from the course makes it look even worse. Even more to the PM AM stack. Yeah, I saw it today. Even the one that's close to the course is kind of changing. You're seeing where it's been like 20 miles an hour there on Thursday morning. Now it's only like 12 to 15 miles an hour. Either way, though, it's been very consistent. So yeah, like you said, if it's even worse, oh boy, these guys are in for a little bit of a reckoning. Draft the Course says, would you favor Streelman or Straka? I would favor Streelman because he's playing in the afternoon. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. And Neil's doing well. Glad to hear that you're doing well, man. So let's hop into this. Again, of course, if there's any questions, do not be shy at all to go ahead and throw them down below. But let's do the Rory McIlroy talk. And I want to play on this week, right? He's coming in with that momentum, but he's teeing off in the morning at this golf course specifically. A few things that I've read, a few things that we've seen from the media packet show that you really can't miss here, right? If you're missing long and to the left, or even long and to the right on a lot of these tee shots, you're going to end up in areas where you can't even find your golf ball. In fact, the shorter hitters, the ones that aren't going to miss as far left to right, aren't going to have as much access to these penalty areas. A lot of them are kind of tucked off to the side, kind of out of play where you can't get to them unless you're one of these uncharacteristically long players. So people like a Rory McIlroy, guys like a Tony Finau, if they want to avoid some of those natural areas, and by the way, what I'm talking about is like, it's literally waist high, even sometimes higher up to like people's shoulders, high fescue grass that I'm talking about. If you're going to avoid that, you have to usually club down. Take that out of play, limit your dispersion to maybe 20, 30 yards off of the fairway or something like that. And unless Rory has the discipline to go out and do so, I don't see him having a very strong week. And really the problem here is the rest of his game isn't all that special, right? And it's not really a knock against Rory McIlroy. He's one of the best drivers of all time, but approach play has been below average. Around the green play, sure, he's been good around the green, but you're not going to win a golf tournament by chipping and getting up and down. And of course, he's further, very far from the best putter in the world. So He's not worthy of the price tag, in my opinion, at a golf course that really limits his upside. And he's also coming in super high up. So that's really the reason for the fade there. And he's also a high ball hitter. So he'll be dealing with, of course, the windy conditions early tomorrow morning. But more importantly, there on Friday afternoon, not going to be favorable for the big guy. Same thing with Tony Finau, also a relatively high ball hitter. These guys that are playing in those tough conditions that also have games that aren't really fit for it are going to be fades for me. So I liked playing them last week. Of course, Tony Finau paid off last week. Rory McIlroy, we played him at the Masters. Kind of backdoored that for us there too. Same thing with Tony Finau for that matter. Not going to be plays for me this week. Guys that I am willing to play in the morning wave, there's 3 of them. There's Abraham Ancer, Corey Connors, and Matt Fitzpatrick. In fact, I'm playing a lot of these 3 players. What differentiates these 3 from the rest of the guys that are playing in the morning wave is their ability to, first off, keep the ball in the fairway, but also the fact that they usually, or I should say, except for Abraham Ancer, they gain across most shots gained categories. So if we take a look at what I'm talking about, they're relatively consistent in both ball striking categories. All of them gain with the putter, right? You can see that with Ancer, Connors, and Fitzpatrick. It's crazy to say that Corey Connors is gaining with the putter, but that's been the case for him for quite some time now, at least 3 months. The guy has been a consistent gainer on these greens. Just the safest plays in these windy conditions. We've seen Ancer have the ability to flight the ball. Of course, the shorter hitters on tour tend to have a little bit of a better ability to keep the ball down, whereas some of these longer hitters, the guys with a little bit more firepower, like a Rory McIlroy, tend to, launch the ball up into some of that wind. So it can be an issue for those guys, not necessarily so much the guys like an Abraham Ancer, Corey Connors. It's not really a lack of distance for Connor that lets him keep the ball down. He's just particularly skilled at flating his golf ball. We've seen him have success at courses like Kiowa Island, where he shot 6 under there in round 1. A few golf tournaments ago was the Arson Classic, had a pretty decent first round, some windy conditions. He has the ability to flight his golf ball. So that's why I have a little bit of confidence in Corey Connors, even though he is in the harder end of the draw. Same thing with Matt Fitzpatrick. He's from England. He's used to these blustery conditions. We've seen that from time to time. And he loves to hit these sawed-off 3/4 shots. It's beautiful, especially on a links style of golf course. Now, this isn't a links style golf course, so he's not going to be as creative, or not able to be as creative as he would hope to be, but you're going to see some pretty cool shots out of Matt Fitzpatrick. So Terrell Hand, more of a high ball hitter, kind of launches the ball up there pretty well. More of a wedge specialist than anything with Terrell Hand, so not really somebody I'm taking a look at. Mark Leishman playing in the morning conditions, also going to be a fade for me. That's because of his driving accuracy. He's also a relatively high ball hitter. He launches those long irons up into the air. Now, Mark Leishman, he is somebody that can flake the golf ball, but the recent form for Leishman has been pretty dreadful. If he was coming in with some semblance of form, you can see he's number 87 in the field when it comes to recent form. That's among the worst here of guys that even have shots gain metrics for this field. I might be on him, right, if he had any semblance of form, but he doesn't, unfortunately. Keegan Bradley will be teeing off in the morning as well. All of these guys are going to be in these really bad conditions. He's just super high owned. He's nearly 20% owned. I get it from the driving side. He's extremely accurate. He's very accurate into greens, which is what we're looking for here. But unfortunately, this is Keegan Bradley we're talking about, who's usually rated around $7,800. Now he's $9,600. So that's the first huge red flag. Second red flag is he's chalky Keegan Bradley. We know very well how that goes. This guy normally goes out there, misses the cut when he's 25% owned. The guy just seems to have a radar for it. I don't know what it is, but even more than that, he doesn't really have the upside we're looking for, right? He deals with putting issues, right? At most golf tournaments, I'd say like 90, maybe 85% of golf tournaments, he's going to lose strokes putting to the field. And while that's not so bad for a $7,800 golfer, for somebody that's $9,600, you want them hitting their ceiling, or at least coming close to a ceiling performance, at least like 15 to 20% of the time, right? That's what you're implying when you're playing somebody in nearly 20% of your lineups. And that's just not going to happen for Keegan Bradley. He's got to at least gain with the putter for something like that to happen. You can see over his last 24 measured rounds, when he's playing some of the best golf that he's played for quite some time, is still losing with the flat stick. And that includes, multiple top 5 finishes, a lot of putting well above his baseline. He is still a negative putter. And of course, if we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, that's when you see him start to slip towards that baseline, right? It's closer to 0.3 shots lost per round to the field. I think what we're seeing of late from Keegan that I've been able to take advantage of, it's a little bit of a flash in the pan. That's kind of what he does. He goes into these stretches where he's decent with the flat stick, and returns back to that dog shit putter baseline real quickly. That's just what he does there. So not somebody that I'm going to be playing this week. Again, he's chalky. He's way too expensive. And finally, after, 8 players on the board, the 9th guy on the board, Russell Henley here, is the first guy playing in the afternoon wave. So that's kind of what I meant when I was talking about there's guys that you just can't avoid playing in that morning wave. Unless you're going to completely avoid everybody above $9,300, you're not going to be able to avoid those conditions. So you're kind of going to have to pick and choose your spots of the guys that you're willing to risk playing in that morning wave. But for sure, the guys that have the highest exposure to are going to be the guys here in the 9K range, the 8K range. There's a lot of plays here that I'm extremely excited about getting to this week. And I'm going to have 40, maybe even 35% of in my lineups. Guys like a Russell Henley, Gary Woodland, even guys like a Sergio Garcia, Max Homa, Siwoo Kim, I'm going to have in the 35% range here. Even guys like a Patrick Reed in a quarter of my lineups, right? And I hate Patrick Reed. You guys know this. It's been a recurring theme here. I fade him pretty much any time I can. He's playing in the afternoon, and this is a decent Patrick Reed golf course. It's not tailor-made for him. It's not perfect for Patrick Reed, but it's certainly a above-average course fit for him. So there's a ton of guys in this range that I love getting to that I don't really have any concerns about getting to. The guys up top, I mean, even the 3 that have Answer, Connors, and Fitzpatrick, you kind of got a weird or bad feeling in your stomach about them because of those conditions. I mean, it could very well be a 2 to 3 shot swing. So these guys like Answer, Connors, and Fitzpatrick are going to have to go out there and play their ass off, for lack of a better word, to end up being, in an optimal lineup by the end of the week. So I do have ownership to somebody like Answer, but it's like 18% in the 150 that I ran before I came on here. Corey Connors, I have 40% of, so I do have a lot of. Same thing with Fitzpatrick. I have like 40% of them. So I am taking pretty heavy stances on some of those guys, but it's unavoidable, right? You're going to have to play somebody up there in the 10K range. They're all unfortunately playing on the wrong side of the draw. We'll catch up on chat. I'm sure there's a few questions down there. Then we'll hop back into the 9K range. Snipe says, do I have any other Prize Picks lineups? I'll show you the cards that I have in at the end or something like that. It's just combinations of the 5 props that I put up. So like I said, that's usually what the preview's for. It's not necessarily the 5 leg card I'm going with because out of the $300 I have in my cards, that's just $50 of it. Most of them are just 2, 3 leg, maybe even 4 leg power plays that I have there, Snipe. But I'll show you that at the end. I'll show you how I have them formatted and whatnot. George says, Laird, yes or no? I have him as a no just because of when he's playing. He's playing in the morning. Not really looking forward to playing any of these value picks playing in the morning that I'm not sold on to begin with. There's some guys on the player pool, right, that are playing in the morning that I absolutely love this week that I'm not pivoting off of, right? I'm still going to play because you're going to see some guys get out of those conditions. You saw it at the Players' Championship. Players that still were able to weather those conditions and by the end of the week were in contention. Just off the top of my head, guys like a Daniel Berger were able to do something like that. So it's not impossible, and you're going to have that guy that comes through and does that this week. But Laird, I wasn't excited about to begin with, so that's why I don't really want to have him going forward. Steven says, very impressive content. Hats off to you. Well, thank you for the compliment. I am glad that you enjoyed the content. George says, yeah, only golf preview I watch. Well, appreciate that too. There's a lot of other good content creators out there as well. So don't sleep on any of those other people. Nick Mars says, how do you feel about Vegas here? I have him in the player pool. We'll talk about him in a little bit more detail here in a second, but he's maybe not my favorite play, at least because of, his main weapon is that distance off the tee, but he's also a really solid approach player. And he's been a much better putter, a much more consistent putter of late as well. So I do like him here. I think he has some upside. History of Kent says, Connor's full swing is like the Iron Byron. What's your feel on Luke List? Absolutely love Luke List. We're going to talk about him. I have 28% Luke List in my lineups. And you're like, he's Iron Byron. Yeah, dude, he just, no matter what conditions you put him into, man, he's automatic. He's going to figure it out. I don't really understand what it is. He might be the best iron player that we've ever seen, just because no matter what conditions you put the guy in, he goes out there, he gains 4 or 5 strokes to the field that week. Just very, very consistent. Jet the Course says, what does the weather look like for round 2? So I showed it on there for Friday. It's extremely windy in the afternoon. So starting right around noon, it goes up towards of like 20 to 25 mile an hour wind gusts. So the guys that will be playing in the windy conditions tomorrow morning are also going to be in the very windy conditions there on Friday afternoon. So they're getting a double-edged sword there. They're getting the bad conditions in the morning and then in the afternoon afterwards. That's why I'm so adamant about trying to target the guys that are playing in this PM AM wave. All right, let's talk about these guys here in the 9K range. So Russell Henley is my favorite play on the slate. Talked about him as a core pick, accurate off the tee, great with the approach play that we're looking for, and a pop putter. Checks all the boxes I'm looking for. Unfortunately, going to be relatively chalky. Right now, I have him at 17.4%, which isn't anything otherworldly, right? He could be, 20, 25% owned. Wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but I'm going to have 40%, right? This is one of these plays that I'm playing well above the field on, but he's playing in the right wave. He has the skill set fit that I'm looking for, and he was a core pick for me to begin with. So just he checks every box that I'm looking for, and I'm okay with him being chalky. I'm somebody that fades Russell Henley a lot more than I play him. He's always really high owned, and for that reason, he's usually a fade for me, unless it's a perfect course fit. And this is one of the few golf courses where it does make some sense. Gary Woodland at $9,100. I don't hate, but I don't love the play. So I'm not fully convicted at 40% like I am for some of these other plays. But the off the tee play has been a lot better. He's more than capable of clubbing down. You've seen him do that at the Honda Classic and holes that he needed to do so. Kept the ball in play for the most part at that golf tournament. And if he can do so here, the approach play has been among the best of everyone in the field. So if we take a look at that, you can see gaining close to 0.9 shots per round. I mean, second of all, Russell Henley, almost 0.9 shots per round for both these guys. So that's why I have him in the player pool. It's going to be by far the most important stat this week. And if he can continue the hot putter as well, oh boy, watch out for those two. Patrick Reed, we already talked about. Now, I'm not going to give too much of a spiel on him because I don't like the guy, right? I don't like saying nice things about Patrick Reed. It's a good course fit for him, okay? And I have a very good track record of playing Patrick Reed. The last 3 times he's won, I've had him outright and I've played him in DFS. So at $9,000, I'm getting weird vibes about him this week. And a few weeks ago, I was asked about him, like, oh, do you think he'll ever win on tour again? I said, yeah, I think he'll win this year. He just does that. He figures out a way to win, even when he comes out of no recent form. We've seen some form from Patrick Reed now. Now I have to admit that, right? The last 2 events, he's looked sharp. He started to look like the Patrick Reed of old, and no matter how much disdain I have for the guy, I can't ignore how dangerous of a player he is. He's unbelievably talented, so I'll give him that. We're fading Paul Casey because of the injury. Can't do it at $8,800. He withdrew from the Pro-Am today, right? So clearly wasn't even wanting to go out there and practice. I'm sure he was on the range. I'm sure he was hitting some chip shots this afternoon and whatnot, unless he was completely crippled by pain. I doubt that's the case, right? He wouldn't have signed up for this golf tournament if he was feeling that way. We'll have to see if he plays tomorrow. Even if he does, I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to worry about it. I don't think he wins this golf tournament with a hurt back. God, I hope he doesn't. Sergio Garcia here at $8,700. I'm willing to get there. He's the prototypical course fit here, accurate off the tee, also long, great approach play. Maybe not the best putter, but you can get away with this at this venue. It's not the most undulating greens. They're not the most fast greens. They're just running at 12.5. Now, in years past, when it was in July, they were running at closer to 13s. But at this time of the year, the GSCA told us it's going to be a 12.5, which isn't anything crazy. Sergio Garcia can handle that. Hopefully just hits a ton of greens in regulation, puts up some relatively decent scores, 2-3 under every single day. I'd take that for Sergio all day. Max Homa, this should be a good course fit other than his putting on bent grass. I don't know. Putting's not a big deal for me this week. Kind of like I said for Sergio Garcia, I'm willing to give people a pass for the putting stats. The unfortunate part for Homa is that he normally gains with the putter, right? So even though over his last 24 measured rounds hasn't been all that good, when he has solid golf tournaments, when he competes, he gains 6 to 7 strokes with the putter. And I know for his career, it hasn't been his best surface. Maybe he can turn it around, right? Hopefully that keeps people off of him, because right now I have him 20% owned, so he's certainly getting a lot of attention. I have 38%, something like 37.5%, I believe what I have of him in my set of 150 lineups. So that's what I'm rolling with there. Siwoo Kim's a sleeper pick for me. I absolutely love him this week. He's good at these positional golf courses, PGA West over there for the Amex, of course, won that golf tournament, won the Players Championship, another positional golf course, TPC Network. So I think at $8,400, he makes some sense. He's not coming in with the best form, but I'm willing to overlook that in this strength of field. It's a decent field, but it's not a crazy strong field, right? You could see somebody like Siwoo break out at this type of field. I'm going to have a little bit of Jason Day. I believe it's 12% in my set of 150. So That is 18 out of my 150 lineups that I have Jason Day in, and it just comes down to the upside, right? You know, he hasn't shown anything to us for quite some time. Just remember back to that fall swing, we had the 2 top 10 finishes in a row, right? People were like, oh, is Jason Day back? If he's going to show that type of upside again, it's going to be at one of these type of golf courses where it's all about your approach play and then making some putts. You don't really have to overpower the golf course with your length because Jason Day isn't that guy anymore. Right? He's going to have to lean into the putting. He's going to have to lean into the around the green play. He's going to have to hit a ton of really solid iron shots to beat the field. He's not going to beat them, you know, hitting 320, 330-yard drives anymore like he used to back in his heyday. Speaking of 330-yard drives, we have Cameron Young at $8,000. You might be able to do that this week. He was able to do so at the RBC Heritage. If you guys remember, went out there to that blistering start. And was able to be accurate with the driver. You know, I expected him to maybe club down a little bit. And while he did that from time to time, he still took the driver out a lot more than I expected. And he split the fairway a whole lot more than I expected. The guy was unbelievably impressive. That's why he's gaining so prolifically with the driver over his last 24. You can see gaining over 0.8 strokes per round. Just in general, I think he's a much higher pedigree player than people are giving him credit for. I've been proven wrong with him. Right? I was on him early when he came onto the tour. You know, he impressed kind of early. I was able to hit on that. And then we caught fire. People were really jumping on the Cameron Young train. I ended up missing a few cuts. I surely didn't see that coming at the RBC Heritage. You know, when somebody like a Cameron Young, who's, you know, a bomber, quote unquote, that's what we, you know, labeled him as real quickly coming out of the Conn Tour, goes out there and performs at a, you know, far from a bomber's golf course. You know, Harbortown is about the opposite of a bomber's golf course, as you would expect. That's impressive. You know, that shows a lot of pedigree. That shows long-term trajectory. So certainly somebody I'll be playing a whole lot of, especially after seeing that performance. Matt Cooger, this is a Matt Cooger type of golf course. You could probably leave it at that. He's also coming in with some really solid form, gaining a ton of strokes around the green with the putter. It's just kind of what he does. And at this type of venue, he should be able to gain a little bit more with the off the tee, just because it's not the longest golf course. And if he brings the irons to the table, watch out. He could be live to actually win this thing. Johnny Vegas, I have in the player pool. He's relatively low owned for Johnny Vegas, you know, usually relatively popular because his shots gain metrics just jump out at you, right? Gains a ton off the tee, gains a ton on approach. Maybe not the best around the green player, but usually people just throw around the green out, right? People don't even like looking at around the green. At this golf course, you can kind of do that. It's not the hardest around the green, that's for sure. But he's got a game at the putter. So we'll have to see. There were some injury concerns with him. You know, he's marked as out on DraftKings, but I have no information on that. So it's not something I can speculate on. As of right now, he's playing. He seems fine from everything that I understand, but just keep an eye on it. Could be something to keep an eye on. Keith Mitchell at $7,800. My first reaction was to fade just because this isn't a Bombers type of golf course. But then I considered the fact if he lays back, you know, what about the rest of his game? Is it good enough to hold up? And again, at first reaction, I was like, no, it's not going to, right? It's not the best putter. He's not the best approach player. But I made myself look into it, and he's gaining across the board. I should say almost gaining across the board. Right? Very, very, very slight loser with the shots gained putting. He somehow turned it into this consistent all-around player. And I don't want to say all of a sudden, right? He showed the flashes at the Wells Fargo, but over time, he's really refined his game. And if you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, this isn't necessarily, you know, a flash in the pan. You can see he's gaining across all 4 categories. And as soon as I saw this, I was sold. You know, he has this knack, or I guess it's completely unsubstantiated at this point, especially when we look at the last 50 measured rounds, for being like a just popper, right? Somebody that gains with the putter from top to time, gains with the approach play from time to time, and with the off the tee play, that's like his one thing, right? He's a very strong off the tee player. That's not the case. He gains across the board now, guys. We need to be treating Keith Mitchell like a much better player than what he's being treated at this point. So even at a golf course like this that seemingly doesn't fit Keith Mitchell or Cameron Young's games, I'm going to be all over them, particularly since they're playing in the afternoon wave. So they have that going for them as well. But just in terms of pedigree and upside, I think that both of them are being a little bit slept on. I mean, even look at, you know, Cameron Young's metrics here. He's almost gaining across. He is gaining across the board. He's gaining across all 4 stat categories. Guys like that have potential to be top 10 players in the world. And now I know it's only 24 measured rounds. It's 6 events, right? Slow down a little bit, Luke, right? But if they can do that long term, right? If they can build on that, if they can make that more of a regularity rather than something that just happens for 5 to 6 events at a time. That's when you become a top 10 player in the world, because that's what you need. You have to be somebody that's capable of gaining across the board. Or at least now, that how competitive is it up top. I mean, that top 10 right now is unbelievable when it comes to its talent. We'll catch up on chat here. We have Neil down here who says Malnati shows up a few times a year. I would agree with that for sure. Benny Levine says, do you prefer Lanto or Straka? I prefer neither. Both of them are playing in the morning wave. Straka is going to be super chalky. Lanto is going to be relatively low owned, but I'm not going to have either of them, to be honest with you. So I don't really want to pick one or the other. Catch Me If You Can says Reed is awesome on bent and maybe the best short game. Yeah, I agree, dude. It's, I like to give him crap, right? I don't like him as a player or frankly as a person, but either way, I'm putting it aside this week. I'm definitely going to be playing him for sure. What's going on, Antonio? Hopefully you're doing well here. He said, thoughts on Hughes and Chappell as low priced guys. I like Hughes, have Hughes in the player pool, right around 12% of my lineups. Chappell, not quite as sold on. I kind of worry about his driving accuracy. I worry about the short game a little bit with Chappell as well, but not going to go with that. Catch Me If You Can says, what does GS stand for? Explain it here in a second. So in short, there's a story involved with this. So it's going to be a short and a long answer. It stands for Grand Slam. Now they go, Grand Slam. Why would your nickname be Grand Slam, Luke? Well, it was back in the day, I was playing travel baseball, right? Ended up hitting 2 Grand Slams in a row. So the first time up, it was bases loaded, right? Hit a home run. It was my first Grand Slam ever. It was pretty sick and whatnot. The next time I get up to bat, which was actually that same inning, we were absolutely spanking the team that we're playing. Ended up mercy rolling them, whatever. Bases loaded again. I hit another Grand Slam in a row in the same inning. So they started calling me Grand Slam Luke because I had 2 Grand Slams in a row in the same inning. And I went with it. So I used it like in video games growing up and whatnot. So that's the nickname. Was I good at baseball? No. That was when I was really young, playing like travel baseball or whatever. Got really bad, really fast at baseball sport for me. Nick Mars says, do you like Schwab? I kind of like him. He's like an average play to me. He's not in my player pool as of right now. I'm just not that thrilled to go and get somebody like a Matthias Schwab. But if I was going to mix in, 150 lineups and I was being a little bit more passive about my ownership, not hunkering down on guys as much as I am this week. As of right now, guys, I only have 31 players in my player pool. At least the lineups I've actually uploaded to Draftkings. I've kind of just hunkered down on the guys that I really like this week because I feel really good about it. I think the industry is a little bit split on how they're taking this down. I don't think people are looking at the weather as much as they should be. And I also think that the course breakdowns out there have been shoddy at best. Let's just leave it at that. I'm not going to trash talk anyone, but I think people have been a little bit lazy this week. I'm looking to take advantage of it. Let's see what we got down here. Benny says, Gordon and Smith. I'm honestly not sure who Gordon and Smith are, to be honest with you. And he said, they called me a broken windshield, Benny, from the massive foul balls. Yeah, dude. I was pretty decent as a relief pitcher. That was about it. After that, when I actually got into like high school and whatnot, I just sucked at baseball. I had to quit real quick. Antonio Esparza says, thoughts on Brandon Matthews? He's that Corn Ferry Tour who's super long. Yeah, great story. I think he's going to be entertaining to watch this week, but I don't think he's going to do anything. He'll probably miss the cut. From what I heard, his game's not really all that special. He's not like dominating out there in the Corn Ferry Tour. He's played pretty decent. I believe he has like a second place finish. He might even have a win or something like that. But those were like country club, very open golf courses where it's all about scoring. This golf course couldn't be more different. It's going to be all about precision. It's going to be all about, hitting precise iron shots. So maybe if it was an easier golf course, something that's going to be like 20, 25 under for the winner, I would play him as like a flyer pick. I just can't do it at this golf course. So unfortunate. I hope we get to see him hit those 360-yard drives, but I'm not going to have him in my player pool. Nick says, thanks for helping us take down the lazies. Yeah, absolutely. That's what these weeks are for. That's for sure. Am I entertaining Brandon Wu? He's one of those guys kind of like Schwab. So I'm going to group those players together as plays that I like, but I'm personally not getting to because of how aggressive I'm being. He's playing in the better of the two waves. He looked really good last week. And in general, his approach play has been getting better. He's gaining to the field right around, I believe, a third of a stroke per round with his approach play. So Benny, I am entertaining the play. I just think he's going to be a little bit popular, right? He's going to be one of those guys who's like 8% owned this week that like when I play 10% of them, or if I was playing them, I'd be like, oh wow, I have 2% leverage on a guy, like woohoo, and he goes out there and he finishes like 30th. That's what I see for him this week, right? He could prove me wrong for all I know, right? The shots gained metrics look good, but that's the kind of vibes I'm getting there. Chris Palmer says thoughts on Blom. He's not my favorite play. Just I think he's a little bit of a lower pedigree player, so not somebody I'll have. Bert Bassett says, great content, Luke. What are your thoughts on Nate Lashley? Only 7K, playing consistently well in a PM tee-off. Great that he's in the PM wave. Gosh, he's exactly like the other two guys we were talking about, where they're like meh plays for me. For it's guys like Matthias Schwab and Brendan Wu. I think he's going to be like 8% owned this week. It makes sense because of the recent form, but they're guys that I'm fading from a game theory perspective, right? So like I would put them down as a play in my quote unquote player pool. But for me personally this week, with how aggressive I'm being, they're going to be fades because we got to think it's Nate Lashley, it's Brendan Wu. It's some of these guys are just lower pedigree players, and no matter how well they model, they're only worth so much ownership, right? So for me on these type of guys, I'm willing to get to like the 8 to 10% range. I'm not confident enough to play them in like 15 to 20% of my lineups because of just a pedigree of these players. They're lower tier players, very inconsistent, at least from a long-term perspective. So Bert, I'm not going to have him this week. Right? I think he's going to be 8% owned. If I play 10%, that's going to be like 2% leverage. And it's going to be one of those plays when you wake up tomorrow morning and you look at the ownership rate, you're like, how did that guy get to 8% owned? It's because it makes sense, right? I don't want to call it a lazy pick because it's not, right? You're looking at last week's shots gained metrics. You're looking at a rolling report of the last 24 measured rounds. But if that's all you're looking at, I would consider it lazy analysis, right? Because if you look at the last 50 measure rounds or even the last 100 measure rounds for both of those players, they're 6K golfers at best. So that's what I'll say with that. Kish McCann says Luke is taking Brandon Wu to some strip clubs. Yeah, we got to fly out there to Potomac. Get him out to the strip clubs. Make sure he doesn't go out there and win this week. Same thing with Nate Lashley. You got to make sure that happens as well. Maybe Rory McIlroy, if he makes the cut, got to take him out, get him away from the wife a little bit. Actually, no, right? He's a kid. We can't be taking somebody with a kid to the strip club. Megan Levine says, I hear you. Can't pick anyone, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't pick everyone. Got to kind of pick your spots. That's for sure. Antonio says, do you play Fanduel or just Draftkings? I'm only on Fanduel. Should I switch? I play Draftkings. I just feel like there's a larger player base. We get some larger prize pools. In terms of the contest selection, I like what Fanduel has to offer. That's for sure. Especially in terms of some of the lower dollar contests. I think they cover the basis a little bit better over there. But I do prefer DraftKings. I just think their pricing is a little bit more adequate. On FanDuel, you can pretty much play anyone. So it kind of opens up the skill gap a little bit. Whereas on DraftKings, you got to think about your lineups a little bit more. Nick Moore says, Tyler Duncan, I love him. When we get down to the 7K range, I'll talk about him. I absolutely love him this week, though. Spencer says, thoughts on Adam Long? Also a player I like who's in my player pool. And Connors or Fitz in cash, I would take Connors just because of the ball striking upside. He's a little bit more consistent. He's also really good in the windy conditions. But that's a close one. Really like both of them in cash. They're my cash cornerstones, those two. Let's talk about some of these guys in the 7K range, though. All right, so we talked about Streelman a little bit during my sleeper pick video. He's a decent course fit here. More of a precision guy than a power guy. Joel Damon is playing in the PM wave. He's a great ball striker. He's accurate off the tee. This is a Joel Damon type of golf course. And if it's going to play easier this year because it's slightly more receptive, of course, he's getting the less windy conditions because of his draw. Could take this place low early and could go out there and be first round leader. So he's one of those guys that I have sprinkled a few dollars on for first round leader. I especially like him for our 4-round stuff. Matthew Neesmith also playing in the PM wave. Has really shown some ball striking metrics over the last 24 measured rounds. Was solid at the Valspar Championship, obviously in contention there. A few weeks before that, also in contention. So we've definitely seen a step up, at least in his playing level over the last 2 months from a Matthew Neesmith. CT Pan, he's playing in the morning, unfortunately. So, of course, when my value picks video comes out, not necessarily something that I'm paying attention to because a lot can change with the weather. But he's still in my player pool. Still have him in a few lineups. I'm not completely avoiding him because of the weather situation. Like I said, you're going to see a handful of guys get out of that morning wave and still have a really solid week here. So not going to be the end all be all for me. Still going to be some guys that are mixed in. Adam Long, on the other hand, will be playing in the afternoon conditions. So, of course, the more advantageous of the two waves. more of an accuracy guy off the tee guy than he is a distance guy off the tee. And you can see in terms of my total modeling, he's at number 18 in the field. So top 20 course fit. Take a look at the recent form metrics. You can see he's gaining pretty much across the board, gaining a ton of strokes off the tee, getting around the green and with the putter, and just a slight loser on approach. Now, last week, week before that, he was a gainer with the approach play. So is coming in with some solid momentum with the irons. If he can go out there and gain just, maybe even 2 strokes to the field with the irons, capable of finishing in the top 5 or top 10. Ooh. I gotta slow down my talking, I think. Throat is telling me to chill out. All right, let's catch up on chat down here. Robert says, Malnati, yay or nay? He's kind of like an average play for me, so I'll go yay. I'll say yay on him. I think he's an all right play. If he's going to pop at any golf course, it's going to be at a short track like this. Proactor says, you looking at scramblers? A little bit, especially with the conditions we're expecting on Saturday and Sunday, but not as much as as a hard golf course, right? So it's a relatively gettable affair, especially if it's going to be receptive. So a little bit, I'd say pro reactor, but it's never really something I hunker down on because you're not going to win a golf tournament by getting up and down a lot, right? You're going to see a winning score here, the 10 to 15 under range, I would imagine this year. You're not going to win by chipping in. So it's part of my modeling. It's just not a huge part of it, I'd say. Moving down a little bit further, Ricky Fowler's playing in the better of the waves, but it's Ricky Fowler. I'm not sure if I can buy in on that. Alex Smalley is getting a little bit more ownership than I would have expected. So this 6.6% number might actually even be a little bit low. So be cautioned with that. He might be one of those, 8 to 9% owned guys, maybe even 10% owned guys come tomorrow morning where you're kind of questioning where that came from. He's playing in the rate of the 2 waves. He had a solid performance last week. He's a ball striker. So people are enamored with those 3 things. And usually I am as well, but there's a price and an ownership level for everything. And I just think he's going to be a little bit too popular for my liking for the range of outcomes, right? He's a solid play. I think he's maybe going to pay out once out of every 10 times that you play him at that price tag, crack through for a top 10 finish or something like that. I would ideally hope that he'd be the 4 or 5% owned, something like that, right? If you're playing someone you 10 to 15% of your lineups, you want to have a higher win percentage, or I guess optimal percentage would be the better way to frame that there than their ownership. And I'm not necessarily sure that's true with Alex Smalley anymore. Brendan's still playing in the harder wave. I'm just not enamored about him, so he's not going to be in my player pool. Denny McCarthy, same deal. Same thing with Dylan Fratelli. So just guys I wasn't really enamored with playing to begin with in the first place. So not people that are going to be in my pool. Russell Knox playing in the easier wave. I always play Russell Knox. That should just be a regular here on the channel. It comes down to the shots gained metrics. He's so consistent, right? Every time you look at the guy, he's going to be gaining on approach and off the tee. And at this point, he's gaining around the green and just a slight loser with the putter rate, right around a third of a stroke per round, which isn't ideal, but that's kind of his thing, right? He's always going to be a dog shit putter. He's always going to be losing to the field in that category. But when he goes out there and is a neutral to the field, which happens from time to time, he's going to potentially win an event, right? If he goes out there and gains to the field, he really has a good chance to win an event. And we've seen Kyle Stanley, one of the worst putters on the PGA Tour, win here at TPC Potomac. So wouldn't put it past somebody like Russell Knox, who I've been talking about it for quite some time. I think he's going to win here in the 2022 season. And this would be a perfect spot for it. Let's see. Cam Davis, I actually have it in my player pool, so I should change this to a yes. I didn't catch that. He's in the player pool that I have a lot due to his performance last time out at the RBC Heritage. Was able to finish in the top 5. Lucas Glover at $7,200. He was a core pick for us to start the week, but kind of like CT Pan, right? It was before we knew about the weather split. So he is playing in the morning, which is slightly concerning for me, but he will be in a few lineups again. He's only 4.9% owned. So it's not like you have to go crazy to get leverage on a Lucas Glover. But rather than playing him in 20% of my lineups, like I was intending to at the beginning of the week, it's going to be closer to like 7 or 8% now. Matthias Schwab at 2.1%. I talked about him before. He's going to be in the player pool, but nothing crazy. He's kind of just like an average play to me. There's plays I just like a little bit more, right? Kind of on the same train as some of those other guys in that 7 to 8% range. I only have him at 2.1% though, so you don't have to play very much of Matthias Schwab to get leverage there. Luke List, One of my favorite plays on the slate, and I know Keshby, if he can, absolutely loves Luke List this week. He told me about that earlier on this week, but I completely agree with him. I mean, just from a ball striking perspective, the guy is completely underrated. I guess the last 50 measured rounds is probably the best way to look at this. I mean, look at this. He's gaining a stroke per round in that category, actually over a stroke per round. Around the green gaining. So from tee to green, you're looking at probably the best player in the field over the last 50 rounds of anybody here in Luke List, then a horrible putter, right? But Kyle Stanley's one here. We've seen some horrible putters like a Francesco Molinari go out here and have a really solid week. So why not Luke List? We had that same exact type of thought process before he went out there and ended up getting his first win ever just 3 months ago. So why not once again? Mark Hubbard was in the player pool. Unfortunately, he's playing in the worst of the two waves. So he's probably not making my final player pool. So that's why he's in a little bit of limbo there for me. Brendan Grace, the same story. He's playing in the harder of the two waves. That's a little bit of an issue for me. Doc Redman, on the other hand, doesn't have to worry about that. So Doc Redman, he went from somebody I was owning at about 10 to 15% of my lineups to upwards of 20%. Because he's in the PM wave and just a really good course fit. I talked about him to start the week. So that's one thing I'll mention about, this whole wave thing is that there's guys that are, of course, finding their way, making their way out of my pool, guys that I'm ejecting from it because of the weather situation, but guys that I'm strengthening my stance on as well, right? Like a Doc Redman, that because he's playing in the better of the two waves, he's already a solid pick for us. We can kind of double down on it a little bit. So like I said, I only have 31 players in my pool. That's really the reason for it, right? The guys that I believe in that are playing in the better of the two waves, I'm going to play a whole bunch of here because I think they're going to get a little bit more ownership as well because of course, this whole situation. Mackenzie Hughes, I have in the player pool as well, so I should change this to a yes. He's playing in the better of the two waves. Nate Lashley, I like the play. That's why he's down as a blank, but not in the player pool due to opportunity cost. I think this 1.5% number is going to be drastically wrong. In fact, I think the number for Svensson in these might be swapped. I'll have to double check after I get off the stream here. But yeah, Lashley is going to be much higher owned than 1.5%. That's for sure. I think the 8% of Svensson might still be accurate, but the number on Lashley is for sure inaccurate. Brian Stewart here at $6,900. It's not my favorite play on the slate. He was to start the week. He was a value pick for us, but he's playing in the AM wave, and he was an above average play for me, right? And now he's just like average, right? He's just like he's a decent course fit. He's accurate off the tee, but now he's got to play in the nasty conditions, right? So it's just I'm not excited about playing somebody like Brian Stewart anymore. Sung Kang is in the better of the two waves. He's had a lot of success at Potomac. 2017, 2018, he made the cut. Also plays a fade, which is the advantageous ball flight at this golf course. I'll have some Tyler Duncan. He's playing in the better of the two waves. Same thing with Austin Smotherman. Also going to be in some of my lineups because he's playing in the better of the two waves and good ball striker, right? Take a look at these stats over the last 50 measured rounds. So we give him a full sample size here, gaining 0.65 shots per round on approach and 0.35 off the tee. So a stroke per round, just ridiculous stuff. Very similar to a Luke List, right? Of course, the around the green play, not nearly as strong, but like I said before, relatively easy course to get up and down at. So I believe in both of those players. Pat Perez withdrew. Keep that in mind with making your lineups. Ryan Armour is going to be a little bit more popular than I would hope for. So this 0.3%, another guy that I think is a little bit misprojected in my algorithm right there, probably going to be closer to like 6% owned this week. So he's not going to be in the player pool. A little bit further down, guys like Ches Reavie had a solid week last week. If I was going to sprinkle in a few more plays in this range, he would be a prime candidate for it. He's a shorter player, so he has some success at these shorter tracks. We've seen that over the years from Ches. Kramer Hickok also playing in the morning wave. So if that wasn't the case, he would have been in the player pool because he also shines at short courses. Adam Schenk playing in the afternoon. So he gets the other side of that draw. He finds his way making his way into my player pool rather than out like a lot of these other players. Same thing with Hank Lebioda, finds his way into my lineup because of him playing in the afternoon wave. Matt Wallace started the week in our player pool, will continue to be in the player pool because he's playing in the afternoon. Actually have 15% Matt Wallace now. So I'm projected for 1% ownership. That's 15 times leverage. I'm certainly willing to take that. Nick Taylor's playing in the morning. He's very similar to somebody like a Stewart where, Stewart I didn't really like all that much to begin with. He was kind of just like an above average play. That was the same thing with Nick Taylor. So he's playing in the morning wave. I'm probably not going to have any Nick Taylor. He's missed like 3 cuts in a row. So it's not just the shots gained look good for him. And that's why we're playing him this week. But if we take a look at the miscut. I mean, the guy's playing in the harder of the 2 waves. No, thank you. Right? I'm not going to force it anymore. He was a sneaky play before that I thought had a good chance to succeed here, but now just not something I'm going to see myself going to. Malnati playing in the afternoon. He is somebody that I'm willing to pivot to off of Nick Taylor. In fact, in my lineups, I did that in 7% of them. Moving down to Hayne Buckley, he's also playing in the better wave. Played good last week, kind of threw it away there in the last round with his off the tee. If he can just lay up off the tee this week, he doesn't need to leverage that distance that he has. If he decides to be aggressive, he's going to have to keep it in the ballpark. But if he can find himself hitting a few more fairways this week than most, he's got a really high upside game because he gains a ton of strokes on bent grass. If you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, which is, again, a little bit more of an accurate sample size for somebody that's only been on tour this long, it's gaining on approach, gaining a ton of strokes off the tee. And again, if he can just gain on bent grass like he has for his career, could have a really solid week here. So I do like him at that price tag. He is in about 8% of my lineups. Moving down a little bit further, not in love with or Peter Uihlein. Uihlein will be playing in the afternoon wave, which is nice at the very least. I do have Cameron Percy in a few lineups. He's playing in the afternoon wave. Decent ball striker, but outside of that, not really anything to get all that excited about. And that's about it. Lower than this, the only other guy I'd be considering would be Vince Whaley because he's playing in the afternoon. He's relatively accurate off the tee, but outside of that, that's all we can say, right? There's a reason why he's $6,200. I mean, most of the names down here, I just have no interest in getting to. You can see there's a withdrawal, just a ton of guys down as a no. You can see Brendan Matthews, I have down as a blank just because of some of the upside he's shown on the Korn Ferry Tour. I don't think it's the best course fit for him. Jonas Blix is a short golf course. Same with Morgan Hoffman. Hoffman, he's a really, really good player, right? We saw that in the past. He had plenty of solid finishes on tour back when he played. He's just super short now. He's lost all of his length off the tee. So I think it's a little bit of a better setup for him, kind of like Harbor Town was, but not anyone I'm going to play. That's all we got here for the 6K range. Let's catch up on chat. Let's see. We got Nick Mars says, what's the most you leave on the table in a large field GPP to try and be different? So there's not a steadfast rule that I set. Normally my optimizer is set at 49,000. That's my, I shouldn't say the optimal. That's my default. I'm usually setting a maximum. So what I'll do from time to time, I didn't do it this week, is I'll set like a 49,800 limit where I have to leave $200 on the table. If I'm playing a lot of chalk, if I'm trying to differentiate with lineup construction rather than the actual players that I'm implementing, that's the route that I go. But usually 49,000. I'll leave up to $1,000 on the table. Anything more than that is excessive. In fact, if you're leaving $200 on the table, you have upwards of a 25 times the chance of being unique as playing actually all $50,000 in a lineup, but up to 1,000. I wouldn't do anything more than that, Nick. It'd be a little bit crazy doing anything more than 1,000, in my opinion. Chris Palmer says cash head to head. Love it. I love that you do that format, by the way. And you have Connors, Henley, Homa, and Young. What are your thoughts on the last 2 guys with 10K left? So just from a generalistic standpoint, I try to stay at $7,000. Doc Redman would make a whole lot of sense to me, and I'd probably use Mackenzie Hughes. I'd just go to both those guys there at 7,000. If you wanted to get a little bit more funky with it, right, you could go up to somebody like a Luke List, and you'd have to pivot down a little bit to maybe somebody like a Sun Kang. But in terms of median projection, what we're looking here for cash certainly would be the Doc Redman Mackenzie Hughes combo. That would be the highest projected combo of the 2. So that's what I would go with there for that type of format. Antonio says, who are your favorite European player this week? Let's see. Let's go to the top of the board, right? Because it's going to be one of these, Matt Fitzpatrick types. It's probably Fitzpatrick, to be honest with you. Let's see. Sergio's a contender, right? Seamus Power. I'm going to go with Fitzpatrick. I think it's definitely Matt Fitzpatrick this week. I think he has a good chance to win this week. So he's the highest one on the board that I have there. But yeah, I'm assuming you're taking that for high euro or something like that on one of those prop bets. Anthony says he's out. See it in the prize picks chat. Let's get it this week. Absolutely. I think Thursday is going to be an absolute gold mine for us. So let's get it, Anthony. All right, let's talk about a little bit of strategy now, guys. We're going to do this super quickly. We're going to hop over to Draftkings, make a few lineups together, and then hop on out of here. So if you have any questions, if there's anybody that we didn't touch on that you want me to go back and circle back on, make sure to go ahead and throw them down in the chat. So first off, a GPP type of build. So we're going to be focusing on a large field contest. So, 50, 70,000 entries, that type of thing. And trying to beat the whole public, right? We're going to have to pivot off of ownership, try and make sure that we're actually unique in these contests. So let's go ahead and show you some of the thought process. So if I'm building by hand, my lineups, a lot of them are going to start with a Corey Connors or a Matt Fitzpatrick. Like I said, Abraham Answer is in the player pool. He's just not my favorite play, right? So a lot of my lineups are going to start with, let's say, somebody like a Matt Fitzpatrick, who I think has a lot of upside here. Just mentioned him as probably my favorite European player in the field. In terms of a second man in, I'm really looking at this 9K range, right? I'm not going to try and force that many lineups with somebody like a Connors and a Fitzpatrick together. It is doable, but because of how weak the 6K range of this week actually is and how strong the 7K range is, not really something that I'm trying to force all that often. I'll have it in a few of my builds. In terms of the second man in, though, let's go ahead and put Patrick Reed in there just for the sake of the video, right? We'll put him in there at $9,000. That leaves us at 77 remaining per player. Let's go ahead and put a Gsluke in there. Absolutely love him here. Love Cameron Young. We talked about him as perhaps my favorite play on the slate. And we still have $7,300. And you can see, as long as we're not forcing in two of those 10K guys, we can pretty much take whoever we want, right? We can be extremely lenient with our salary. You take a Kevin Streelman and finish up with somebody like a Sun Kang. So this, or even a Tyler Duncan, right? Go to this type of lineup would be just as easy in a large field GPP. Now, the reason why we know this should be relatively unique is Tyler Duncan, right? Going to be sub 5% owned. I'd assume 2 to 3% owned on this slate. And while guys like a Cameron Young should be relatively popular, I would expect Matt Fitzpatrick to be relatively popular. You're looking at sub 15% owned, probably even sub 10% ownership on somebody like a Patrick Reed, and sub 10%, or at least I had him at like 10.5% ownership on somebody like a Siwoo Kim. So as long as you have two relatively low owned plays up top, somebody that's going to be in that 2 to 3% owned range, I'm relatively comfortable with this lineup being unique. And if you really wanted to make sure of it, right, you wanted to, no doubt be unique here, just leave the $200 on the table, right? With my optimizer, I'm running it with $200 left on the table. Pivot to a Brandon Wu, right? A play that's very comparable to somebody like a Kevin Streelman. And of course, you get the safety there with the duplicates. So that's what you could look at in the large field GPP. But now let's talk a little bit about single entry. So not really going to focus on ownership nearly as much because we're assuming we're only playing against a couple hundred entries or maybe 1 to 2,000 at the very most. So duplicates, if you're going to duplicate yourself, it might be with 2 to 3 other entries at the very most. Nothing to really worry about, right? You're really more worrying about like duplicating with 15 to 20 people in one of these large field GPPs. And instead of winning 100,000 or 200,000 first, you end up winning something like 15,000, right? That's a huge drop off in terms of your ROI. But in these single entries, it's not a big deal. So we can be a little bit more chalky about it. So let's go ahead and show you the balanced build, especially for the single entries, because this week, I think it's a very intriguing option just to take a ton of 8K options. So to perhaps start a lineup with Russell Henley, right? Take nobody playing in the morning wave, right? Only going to the PM guys. You can mix in guys like a Max Homa. You take Siwoo Kim. You take Sergio Garcia in that same lineup. You can even go down here and take a Cameron Young if you wanted to and still have $7,000 remaining for your last guy. So in terms of single entries, higher dollar contests this week, I'd have a hard time not building a lineup like this because you can really feel solid about everyone in the lineup. I mean, even Doc Redman, right? He's one of my favorite value plays. I have him like 20% of my lineups this week. This is the type of lineup I'd be going with in single entry or 2 to 3 max type of tournaments. Just a lot of guys in that 8 and 9K range. It just feels like one of those weeks where one of these guys in the 8, 9K range is going to win. You're going to see like 5 out of the top 20 being guys up here at the top of the board. Would not surprise me whatsoever. All right, and now let's go ahead and wrap it up with a cash lineup. So very similar to the lineup that we just made. I think it makes sense to be pretty much as balanced as humanly possible, and also to only focus on guys that are playing in the afternoon wave. Russell Henley is a lock in cash for me. Same thing with Sergio Garcia. I think they're absolute must plays in cash this week. I think Matt Cooger is a very solid cash play. You can go up to somebody like a Max Homa even, but personally, probably prefer going to Gary Woodland just because based on the recent form, the fact that he's been on absolute fire with that approach play. In terms of some of the guys in the 7K range, up here at $7,700, Strowman makes a whole lot of sense. He's gaining pretty much across the board with the shots gain metrics, as we showed before. And at $7,300, wrap it up with Russell Knox, playing in the afternoon wave, gaining in both ball striking categories. This is the type of lineup I'd be going to here, where my cheapest guy is only $7,300. We have a lot of these quote unquote chalky plays up there, like a Henley, Sergio Garcia, that's going to get plenty of ownership. Gary Woodland, who's going to be like 20% owned on the slate. That's what you're looking for in cash. So a little bit different than what we had for the single entry or 2 to 3 max type of tournament, but very similar type of mindset, right? Just trying to take the best median projected plays that we can, because a min cash for a single entry is, a lot bigger deal than a min cash for a 150 max. In fact, I don't give a shit about min cashing and 150 maxes. I literally don't care about them. I'm only looking for those top 5 to maybe even 1 percentile type of performances. Whereas in 2 to 3 maxes, when I'm putting $250, $300 into the same lineup, sometimes even more than that for major championships, I kind of want to make my money back, right? So it's a little bit of a different strategy. So that's why I like to go through all of those lineups there. We'll finish up with a chat catch up, and then we'll hop on out of here. Antonio says this isn't a golf question, but would you do a UFC breakdown? I used to do them in the past, and I ideally want to do them going forward. So I know we have a big UFC card coming up. If I can find some time, I will, because I like doing it. I still break down a lot of UFC stuff. I still play it myself. Had a lot of success last week, actually. My 150 max ended up finishing in the top 5. So yeah, Antonio, I'm going to do my best to do that this week. Thank you. And good reminder there. That's for sure something I can try and do. Nick Mars says Smotherman and Smalley both PM, AM. Yeah, so that's why I do like Smotherman there. There was somebody else right around Smotherman that I like that I have in my player pool. Smalley, I think he's going to be a little bit higher owned though. Of course, Smotherman missed the cut last week. Smalley ended up having a really good week. Maybe that's the difference between them. So I don't know. I'm going to have Smotherman over Smalley, but I think both of them are really solid plays. That's all I've got for you guys, though. So if you're watching this on replay, it's going to cut off here. But if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them down in the comments. I'll try and get back to you as soon as humanly possible. If you're watching this live, make sure to like it before you hop on out of here. Helps me with growing the channel, helps get this out there to even more people. So I appreciate that. Best of luck with all of your lineups for this week. If there's any questions, I'm going to get them before we hop out of here too. So go ahead and fire those down below if you do have them. It's going to be a fun week. I'm expecting this to be a relatively high ROI week, given the fact that it's, I don't want to say a new golf course, but a golf course that we don't see all the time. People tend to get a little bit lazy, right? They don't tend to maybe do as much work as they need to. So hopefully we can leverage that. Antonio does have a question. He says, thoughts on Harman? Does being a lefty help? It does help because he's more of a drawer of the golf ball and he's a lefty, right? So he's moving it from left to right still, because you don't want to miss on the left side of this golf course. That's where all the creeks are, a lot of the natural areas that come into play. But he plays in the morning wave, at least if memory serves me right. He plays in the morning wave. That would be my only concern with him, Antonio. But I appreciate you guys. Like I said, best of luck with all of your lineups, all of your outright bets for this week. I'm feeling a big one. One of us is going to take down something big this week. Hopefully it can be you.